Hello everyone, it is Renee aka AVICIOUSVIXEN, and for my first video of the new year I want to show you how I made this dice box, which was a Christmas gift, but you can use these steps for any kind of box honestly. To start off, I got this box from the craft store for around $5. I took off the hardware it came with and sanded it to prep it for staining later on, and just to make sure it didn't have any finishes or wood glue spill over from when it was originally put together. Since this box was for my boyfriend, I wanted to personalize it as much as possible, so I decided to wood burn his gamer tag into the lid. I went to dafont.com, which is a website I've used for years now to get free fonts for various things, and I found a font that was kind of medieval looking, but it was also legible, and I felt it wouldn't be too hard for me to burn it into the lid. I installed it and went into Paint Shop Pro to test the font and size before printing it out. Instead of making a stencil, which is also an option if you plan on using certain fonts or words repeatedly, I used some graphite paper to transfer it onto the lid. I found the center of the lid and aligned it with the middle letter in his name, which was easy since it had 5 letters. And cut the graphite paper around the same size as the text, then taped it down. Graphite paper has a grayish side and a super dark side, which is the side you want to be touching whatever you're going to be working on. Using a pencil, I just traced around the letters, making sure I was using enough pressure to transfer all of the lines I made onto the wood. And I didn't want the sides of the box to be plain, so I added some symbols from a book series that he likes as well called charter marks. They're made of basic shapes, so it was pretty easy to add them as well. I just made sure to space them out so they didn't get covered by the hardware I would add later, and just made sure that none of them were too close to each other before I started wood burning. I got this wood burning tool from Michael's, but you can get this at any craft store. As with any tool that is extremely hot or uses chemicals, you want to be super careful. This one in particular doesn't have an indicator that is near the actual tool to tell you when it's on, so don't leave it plugged in unattended or where someone or some pets might bump into it. You also want to be in a well ventilated area or outside if you can, since this will be producing smoke. I was inside but near my open window with a fan pulling the smoke away from me. For the actual burning, I chose the tip I wanted to use for the job and changed it out before I plugged the tool in and turned it on. I had a test piece of wood nearby so I could see how much pressure I would need and how long I would have to hold the tool in a certain place to get the look I wanted before actually working on the box itself. You want to take your time with this, not only because it is a hot tool, but you don't want to mess up your design and have to try sanding it out if you do make a mistake. I finished the outline of the letters first, paying attention to the overlap of certain curves, and after that I used the tool with a wider surface to burn inside the letters, adding some texture where I'd apply the gold leaf later on. I wasn't too worried about making everything look super crisp, so it worked that the texture was higher and lower in some spots, and it added more interest to the piece in my opinion. For the marks on the side, I didn't follow the shapes perfectly, so it fit the aesthetic I was going for, which was to make it look like a handmade arcane magic box. I went over some areas a few times, imagining how I wanted some of the recessed areas to look, and added some designs to the corners of the lid so it didn't look too plain compared to the rest of the box. After I was certain I was done with wood burning, I went on to staining the box. So looking at my test piece, you can see the idea I'm going for, which is this blue stain with gold leafing. You want to be certain that you're done with wood burning before you start staining, because stains often have chemicals in them which are not good for the lungs, and burning them will only put them in the air, making it even worse. I'm using a blue acrylic stain that I got from the clearance section in Michael's, and it took about 1.5 bottles to get the color that I ended up with. I poured the stain into a paper plate and applied it with a foam brush to avoid brush marks, but you could also probably use a cloth of some kind. I let it sit maybe 10 to 15 seconds and then wiped it away with a paper towel, going in one direction so I didn't end up with patches of color or causing the paper towel to tear from friction, causing it to pill up on the stain. This was the first time I've stained anything, but what I can tell you is to do things in light layers and wipe away excess stain that isn't absorbed into the wood, or else it will dry on the top of the wood and just get sticky. I went back and forth between the lid and the bottom of the box, giving each time to absorb as much stain as they could, as well as doing the inside wall since I wasn't sure at the time if I would be adding felt to the sides or not. I gave them both a final wipe down, this time by laying the paper towel on the surface and rubbing the back of it to soak up what it could before letting them dry completely, and here's how they turned out. Once things were sufficiently dry, I went on to start the gold leafing. I used imitation gold leaf, and I left a link to what I use below, but you can also get it from any craft store, as well as just gold leaf pens or powders that simulate it. I used a paintbrush that I wasn't too bothered about losing to apply the size, which is the adhesive, and I did that everywhere I wanted the gold leaf to be. You want to be careful with this because anywhere the size is, the gold leaf will stick to it. That includes anywhere outside of the lines or on your fingers. I applied 2 to 3 layers of size, letting them dry between each layer until it was clear. Then I started to apply the gold leaf. It took a few minutes to figure out how to best apply it, but the technique that worked for me was taking clumps of the gold leaf and dabbing it onto the area I was working on. Then using a stiff bristle brush, I stippled it into the shapes. I also used my fingers at some points, rubbing the leaf into the shapes to make sure it picked up a lot of the texture. After brushing away anything that didn't stick, I reapplied the size to any uncovered areas, using the remnants to fill them in. Once the lid was finished, I used some matte black paint to line around the letters and to fill in some of the loops to give them more separation and definition. Then I sprayed both sides of the box with some indoor-outdoor spray sealant, with my fan pulling the excess chemicals out of the window. I did light coats of this, letting them dry for a few hours between before adding another, and I think I did about 3 coats in total. Once that was dry, I went over the edge of the box with gold leaf as well, buffing it into the surface as I assumed this area would get a lot of wear and tear. I went over that with the spray as well, and after it was dry, I started working on the interior of the box. I didn't want the inside of the box to be too simple in comparison to the outside, so I thought it would be a cool idea to add a cutout in the lid for aesthetics. Once I got the measurements for the inside of the box, I cut my felt to fit inside, testing and trimming where I needed to. You want to cut your lining a little bigger than your measurements and trim where you have to, as it's easier to take away rather than add back more. The main color of the lining will be black felt, but for the design in the lid, the bottommost layer will be yellow, and that will be seen through the cutout. When choosing a design, if you're doing this by hand, you want to make sure it isn't too detailed. Too many curves and cuts can make it hard to cut out by hand, and it can be time consuming and difficult to adhere all the pieces properly without making a mess or making the image hard to see. You can probably freehand something if you like, but I just went to Google Images. I found this image of a minimalistic cat silhouette and brought it into Paint Shop to change the size and erase some of the smaller details like the eye spot and the whiskers. I made 3 different sizes of it, printed them out on one sheet of paper, and once I chose the one that fit best, I used a utility knife to cut out the design of the felt. I did cut through some places a few times, but we can fix those minor issues with fabric glue later. Once I finished with that, I set it aside and glued in the background color of felt, using the end of a ruler to make sure the corners were all tamped down nicely. While that was drying, I started working on the dividers for the bottom tray. You could probably get some extra large tongue depressors, but I couldn't find any, so I just opted to get some balsa wood planks and cut them to size. This kind of worked in my favor because I could make sure they would be the right height inside the box, so nothing would shift between the sections if the box were flipped upside down. I measured the inside of the box with the wood, marking just a bit outside where it actually was, since I could just sand down the excess. This would just make sure I had a snug fit along with the glue I would use to hold them in place. I used my ruler as a straight edge and my box cutter to cut the wood, just pulling it along the line I made a few times so that I could just snap it. I cut one long piece and then a shorter piece, so the box had 3 sections in total, and sanded all the sides of them to make sure they were even and had no jagged edges. I did some test fits, trimming and sanding until the height was just right, and then I set them aside and finished the lid of the box. I put the designed felt into the lid, making sure all the cutouts were laying properly before I started to glue them down. I used a brush to apply the glue in sections, putting it beneath the loose pieces and pressing it down to adhere properly. Once the design itself was secure, I then spread the glue out to make sure the rest of the felt was stuck down. If you do a cutout, you want to make sure you use 2 full sheets of felt and not just cut around the area around the design for the bottommost layer. This could cause dips and indents that could alter dice rolling, which is what I intended for the lid. That's also another reason for making sure the design you choose doesn't have too many details to cut out. Once I made sure the top layer was glued in, I tamped down the edges again and let it dry while I worked on the dividers again. I covered them in felt, basically folding the felt around it like a very strange hot dog, and I spread glue over one side, folded it over, and repeated it on the other side. Once they were dry, I used hot glue to glue them into the box, making sure they were aligned and that I was gluing the exposed side of wood to the bottom of the box. You can use neater methods to get them to stick inside, but since I was going to cover the seams with more felt anyway, I just did what I could to make sure there wasn't a ton of glue spillover and stuck strips of felt over the glue before it dried. I added one more layer of felt to the larger section of the box in case the bottom was used as a dice tray as well. And after I let that dry, I went on to adding the hardware. I ordered this set of hinges and latches from Amazon. They're larger than the hardware that came with the box, so I kind of aligned them with the center of the old holes and made sure they were the same distance away from the sides of the box, marking them with a pencil. I taped the box together to keep everything centered and used the screws that came with the sets to attach everything. When attaching the hinges, you don't want to screw in one side completely and then the other, as this can throw off alignment and tension. Since the hinges needed 4 screws, I screwed in the top left screw partly, just to keep the hinge from sliding off. Then I screwed in the bottom right screw the same way. I then did the top right screw and finally the bottom left one, and then I tightened them all once they were in place. For the latch on the front, I measured the box and found the center of it since the original holes were slightly off. The bottom of the latch had 3 holes, so I did the center first and then screwed in the 2 sides the same way I did the hinges, screwing them in halfway and then tightening them once everything was properly centered. I fitted the top of the latch into the bottom and made sure there would be a little bit of tension to keep the latch closed after the tape was off, before screwing it into place as well. After some tests to make sure things were closing properly and a final cleanup, the box was done. I was pretty happy with how this turned out, and I might end up making a box for myself just to try out some other ideas. I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know if you plan on making one of these yourself, or even if you might just have found something helpful from the tips I shared. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.